So I'm recording this at a very specific moment, and partially I'm doing it because we are in the moment that we're in. Um, let's see. It's January 15th, 2026, and there is a lot going on in the United States. Um, so I'm kind of tuning into the field of it. There was a woman that Immigration Customs Enforcement agents shot with minimal, if any, provocation in Minneapolis that led to protests. And now the administration is threatening to um, invoke the Insurrection Act against the state of Minnesota, which is like an escalation. And put in the context of, you know, elections later this year and all sorts of stuff, it seems like the stage is being set um, to either um, delay, cancel, or otherwise muck with the election. So that's just kind of the context, part of what's going on. We also just baldly did a coup in Venezuela, or threatening to recolonize Greenland. There's a lot happening. And, there's always a piece of me that wants to like be outspoken and kind of activist about it. And then there's kind of a more grounded part that's bearing witness and is in grief around it, both because of the amount of suffering that's happening and will continue to happen over the next however long this process takes, but also because of how unnecessary it is. When I really come to that place of witnessing, there is absolutely nothing unpredictable about what's unfolding right now. It's almost as if there's a script that everyone is going by, from the administration to protesters to, um, you know, folks who are speaking out against it in Congress and public forums. It feels like that as long as everybody plays their prescribed role, there is an absolutely predictable outcome of this, which is not good. And it's almost as if this story and these roles are archetypes because they've unfolded over and over and over again throughout history. Margaret Wheatley talks about this a lot, that this kind of end stage imperialism is a cycle that has repeated consistently over thousands and thousands and thousands of years. But it's not unbreakable. The thing that makes it keep going is that once, if you think of this as an archetype with an energy and a consciousness of its own, once it kind of takes hold, it's actually running the show. And for folks who are engaging with it, there's no awareness that we're being run, right? There's no awareness that we're being maneuvered by this kind of independent consciousness or archetypal energy. It just kind of is there. And we still do have choice. I think that's the part that's most heartbreaking and frustrating. Something I was thinking about this morning is a map that I use when I'm teaching breath work to kind of talk about the process of deepening that breath work allows. And it starts with each individual human soul before the moment of embodiment, before the moment of birth, exists in this realm of infinite potentiality. Every soul is connected with the infinite, with the divine, with God, with everything that's ever been, everything that'll ever be, everything that is. And within that field, every soul exists its infinite potential. And then at the moment of birth, that soul enters a context, right? That context is a family, a country, a socioeconomic status, their genetic makeup, and whatever it might be. And that context kind of creates a container for that soul to find itself, right? To begin to grow. So we go from infinite potential to context, which doesn't necessarily limit that infinite potential, but it does place boundaries on it. right? A structure which that soul can develop. And then as we get older, that context kind of shapes us. And the context isn't just our family, it's everything that happens to us, beautiful things, horrendous things. And in order to navigate and survive that journey of life, to survive all of those things that happen, all of the intensity of the world, we develop a personality or a mask that we put over the soul. Common masks could be the overachiever, the rebel. We kind of take on these roles based on our context in order to survive. I'll use myself as an example that growing up, the roles that I learned to play, the behaviors that I adopted, the masks that I crafted to survive, a childhood that had, while nothing sort of acute, had a lot of developmental challenges around it, we'll just put it that way, was the mask of the high achiever, right? The smart kid who was never quite smart enough to be the smartest, but was plenty smart, gifted and talented, whatever word you want to use. And so, and I've talked about this here before, I very much learned in order to survive my context to move in linear, predictable ways, right? And those parts of my soul that were nonlinear, that yearned for the mystical, for the numinous, for the mystery of it all, kind of took a back seat. And that came at great personal cost. And we all have some version of that. It becomes like our personality, our identity, our id. So we grow up putting on all these masks and we start to conflate the mask with the self, right? If you think of Hamlet, I will put on an antic disposition. When he wears the masks for too long, he becomes the mask. I just butchered that reference, but if you've read Hamlet, you know what I'm talking about. But the idea being that if we play act for too long, then we start to think that that's who we are. And so we grow up and maybe we start a family, we get a job, and we end up at the top of this funnel. And it looks like we have choice, right? We are at this point kind of an accumulation of masks and wounds, victories, relationships. We are at that point when we reach, late teens or adulthood, unless we've been through an initiatory process, we are so far removed from that place of infinite potential, from that core soulness that was with us when we were born, that we think that's who we are. And we can move to the left or the right. But until we start doing inner work, we're just kind of moving. If you think of a windshield wiper blade, we're moving like at the tip of this windshield wiper blade. And so if we move, let's say politically over, we make the choice to swipe over to the right, then maybe we are in favor of fascism and totalitarianism, and that feels like a choice. It's coming from our personality. And if we move over to the left, maybe we protest. Maybe we're, extreme liberal, Democrat, libertarian, whatever. And that feels like a choice as well. But if it's coming from that place that is not grounded in the soul, there's a really high probability that we are being run by the consciousness of whatever archetype is active in the collective, whatever collective story, whatever collective cycle is active in the collective is kind of running us and limiting our perceived choices. And this is where inner work becomes so, so important, because it allows us to go deep, deep, deep through all of those layers of development. Now, something that I think is a really interesting distinction is like therapy basically takes you through layer by layer, and there are infinite things to unknot before we get to the soul level. Before we get to that connection with consciousness and infinite possibility, you will get mired in this kind of minefield of complexes, right? So complex PTSD, for example, which is a very real thing. But if we focus on that, if we focus on resolving the trauma first, there will be no end to that work, because it will just go on infinitely. There are infinite details to work out. But if we work with a practice, right, that is somewhat energetic or spiritual in nature, something like breath work, something like inner dance, working with psychedelics, things that can help us go beneath all of those masks, all of those complexes, all of that, complex minefield of beliefs and matrices of behavior, to just touch, even if it's just for a moment, that initial pulse of soul. If we can get back to that moment where that infinite potential that each soul contains crosses the threshold and is born into a context, if we can touch that, then all of a sudden it becomes much more easy to work our way back up through the levels, because we're grounded in our own soul. And when we do that, some of those beliefs, some of those, capital or lowercase t traumas that we may spend months or years trying to unravel, it's not that they disappear, they're real, but they become less impactful, less relevant, because now we are resourced from our own soul. We are resourced. And when we're resourced from our own soul, we're also resourced from the infinite, that place from which the soul originates. And so what we're missing when we get locked into these cycles of societal decline, which again has happened over and over again for thousands of years, one of the reasons is that we've gotten so separated from our individual and collective souls. And this is not a new idea. This is something that Jack Forbes talked about in the Columbus and Other Cannibals, what Vanessa Andreotti talks about in Hospicing Modernity, what Robin Wall Kimmerer talks about, what any number of indigenous authors from all over the world and prophets from all over the world have talked about, that there is something in the culture that has separated us from our soul. And so when I tune into the field of this moment and genuinely sit with it, what I feel is not a spur to overtly political statement or overtly political action, but for me, an invitation, and maybe for us, an invitation to go beneath it, to reconnect with soul as a way of resolving the essential wound that drives the cycle that keeps repeating over and over and over and over again. And that maybe with this iteration, if enough of us go beneath the surface in that way, that there is a possibility that we may not have to do this again as a species, as a collective. A possibility that we can, if not break the cycle, just kind of spin off into something else, something new, something emergent, something that we don't have language or structures for yet. Yesterday, I was on a call with the Opportunity Collaboration community, which was such a huge gift to just be in community, even virtual, with these amazing people from all over the world. And one person in one of my breakouts, we were talking, forget what the exact prompt was, but what came up was what's going to take us forward. And what he said was, imagination will lead us forward, not history. That if we only look back, we're doomed to be in this loop. But if we're able to tap into imagination, and then someone added collective, so collective imagination will bring us forward. Because imagination is the place where our soul meets consciousness, meets the infinite. It's a very playful space. If you think of the Sistine Chapel, Michelangelo's beautiful painting where, angels and man, I actually don't know who's touching who, but there's a sense that if we reach out towards the infinite, it reaches back towards us. One way we can reach out towards the infinite is through the beautiful exercise and exploration of imagination, collective imagination, to conjure up the most beautiful version of what can emerge from this moment. And this isn't to say that protest is wrong or politics is wrong. It's just not where I feel called. It's not where I feel the invitation in this moment. So I'm curious, if you get quiet, maybe if we get quiet together just for a moment or two, I'm curious if we attune to the field together. If we just tune in to our breath, to the present moment, if we let our weight get heavier, what images, what feelings, what worlds of imagination may step forward.